So I woke up this morning to the horrible news of what happened over in Christchurch. And I was just really on my phone and I was receiving tons of messages on WhatsApp, on Facebook Messenger from many of my online friends who, to them, I'm like their only person from New Zealand they know. So I was like checking these messages and just like reading some articles about it. And it felt so surreal. I came across some actually partial video footage of the live stream of the attack itself, and the guy was driving up to two mosques with guns with like Bible inscriptions written on them. I couldn't exactly tell, and he was playing Remove Kebab music in his car. Now that shit felt so surreal. So me myself as a New Zealand citizen who lived in the country for most of my life, who has been at times politically active as a right-leaning person who interacted with many right wingers in the more conservative sphere of things, I would like to give you my honest opinion about what happened in this terrorist attack. So, I'm an Asian immigrant to the country, and to many of the right wing New Zealanders, some identifies as nationalists or even white nationalists that I have interacted with. I felt like I was never disrespected or targeted in the context of exchanging ideas through conversations. So New Zealand white nationalists are honestly pretty tame compared to, say, their American or Australian counterparts, which is, made me very surprised that this happened reading the headlines. However, my assumptions were proven to be true when I was watching some partial video footage, and the shooter himself on live stream was speaking to his live stream audience, I presume, and he had an Australian accent. And this was later confirmed to be true that he is an Australian citizen. New Zealand is obviously a much smaller country than Australia in terms of population, and the white nationalist movement in Australia is much, much bigger and has a bigger presence overall. However, as of right now, according to the news media outlets, there isn't much information given on why as to he chose Christchurch as the city of this attack, what his motives were in terms of choosing Christchurch, and also it was mentioned that three other suspects were arrested along with the shooter himself. But we don't know if the three other suspects that allegedly helped him plotting this attack are also Australian citizens. I must say I'm slightly surprised that this pre-planned attack against Muslims didn't happen somewhere in Australia or even the North Island of New Zealand, but rather Christchurch, which is located in the South Island, which is well known for being predominantly white populated, especially after the 2011-2012 earthquakes. A lot of the immigration population in that city actually moved out of there and moved to other parts of New Zealand. So it was really surprising to me. Like, first of all, there are even mosques in Christchurch. For them to have mosques, there must be a concentrated population of Muslims. More than I expected. But the only reason I can really think of that this attack happened in Christchurch was because they pick the city for its name. So I took a look at this guy's manifesto, and I'm not saying that these are my beliefs, but I'm just saying for someone who is a deranged, ideologically motivated mass shooter, his manifesto seemed kind of lack of substance. Like, he did not brought up, for example, the really common one, the Jewish involvement in mass third world immigration into Western countries. He did not brought up the Jewish question at all. And the only thing he mentioned about Jews was that he mentioned that Israeli Jews who lives in Israel are not his enemies, which really make it seem like this is just a single-faceted attack by a hot-headed white Australian guy who, hates Muslims and uses this as a retaliation for so many of the radical Muslim, ISIS attacks that happened in Europe and America in the past few years. That he himself stated he was made known to these attacks while traveling in Europe back in 2017 spring and summer. And he really noticed like so many of these attacks that happened in Sweden, Germany, and France, all these EU countries that accepted a lot of predominantly Muslim refugees. Which I think a line should be drawn that he is, an anti Muslim terrorist. Now this is a thing, but I wouldn't say that he's a neo-Nazi just because like he did not really target Jews or like made any mentions that the Jews are a threat in his manifesto so far that I have read. So until further information is released, I just can't say he is like ideologically driven, very sophisticated neo-Nazi like Anders Breivik, for example, that this shooter has stated was one of his main influences. And I say this because he, in contrast to Anders Breivik, was radicalized in a very short period of time, back in 2017 till now. That's only like 2 years where Anders Breivik really pre-planned his attack, throughout the course of years. I can understand his state of shock going from Australia to parts of Europe. I imagine he went to very big tourist cities. Up until that time, by 2017, there were a lot of African and Muslim migrants. I can understand how he felt, which only makes you wonder how many other people also feel exactly like him. The demographics of the Western world, especially Europe, really changed a lot after the Syrian refugee crisis that happened a few years earlier, which is all the more important to bring into spotlight who caused the Syrian refugee crisis in the first place. It's also so disappointing that the New Zealand government did not foil the plans of this attack earlier and completely prevented, since the New Zealand intelligence agency has access to so much information and assets in terms of monitoring and surveillance due to New Zealand being a part of the Five Eyes program. It is now really up to Western governments prevent further attacks, possibly in retaliation of this very mosque attack, but also, further attacks against Muslims that would just fuel this racial conflict and will eventually erupt into a full-blown race war even. I think that's a distinct possibility. And to be honest, a lot of people in our world are hoping exactly for that.